For a lot of pro athletes, getting drafted is probably the greatest day of their life. You're about to fall into a life-changing situation and get to play the game you love at the highest level, but getting drafted is only part of the process. There's so much a player needs to navigate through before suiting up in their first NFL game, including getting that rookie deal signed. Contract holdouts are normal, as players will not participate in any official team activities until they put pen to paper and officially become a member of the team. You usually expect a deal to happen, but what happens if a rookie contract doesn't get signed? In that very rare case that this does happen, it opens the door for a player to sit out the season and enter the next year's draft. My name is Caleb, and I think that people forget that it is actually possible to get drafted twice depending on the situation. The 2025 offseason has seen one of the most unique rookie holdouts in recent memory, as Bengals first-round pick Shamar Stewart had been in an ugly standoff with the team over issues with the guaranteed money. He was the very last 2025 first-rounder to sign his rookie deal, and there was speculation that he'd sit out the season and enter the 2026 draft if they never came to an agreement. This happens way more often in baseball, but you rarely ever see it in the NFL. We're deep into the offseason, and as the inspiration for this video, I wanted to talk about 4 players with unique situations that led them to getting drafted twice. And to find the first player to do this, we have to go all the way back to the 1946 NFL draft. Being a pro football player was not the most lucrative career choice in the 1940s, so even some of the best college football players of the time period were not necessarily aspiring to play in the NFL. There was a decent amount of talent back then though, as they set the foundation post-World War II and headed into the 1950s. This included UCLA two-way player Cal Rossi. As both a running back and DB, he was named first and second team all-conference as a sophomore and junior respectively, as a lot of his peers called him a shifty runner. He was also a noted baseball player for the Bruins, where he was named all-conference as a sophomore. In the 1946 NFL draft, his name would be taken off the board by Washington 9th overall, and the front office thought they had landed the California kid to bring him to DC. But at the time, Cal Rossi was a junior, and college juniors weren't allowed to be drafted to the NFL, a rule that I recently found out was not changed until 1990. You'd think a professional football team with a top 10 pick would know this, but their pick was deemed illegal and forfeited to the league. Rossi returned to UCLA for his senior season, and he had another great year, being named second team Pacific Coast Conference again, and it looked like he was going to be a top pick off the board again. Coincidentally, Washington would select him again, this time with the 4th pick of the 1947 draft. Not only did they take the same player 2 years in a row, but they took him with an even higher pick this time, and I can almost guarantee that this is, and probably will be, the only time that this will ever happen. There's not much that I could find on why they liked Cal Rossi so much, but they liked him enough to draft him twice in separate drafts, which should say something. But even after being drafted in the first round 2 years in a row, Rossi would never play a down in the NFL. He told Washington that he wasn't pursuing a pro career and opted to go into teaching instead, a career where he'd become an advocate for teachers' rights and a high school football coach. Washington had maybe one of the first notable draft blunders ever, as they are, to my knowledge, the only team that drafted the same player twice that would never play for them. But it is understandable for the time period why he decided not to play. And he wouldn't be the last two-sport college athlete to be selected in multiple NFL drafts, the next coming almost exactly 40 years later. And not only is he the most famous player to ever get drafted twice in the NFL, but he was a first overall pick that felt the team that took him was trying to sabotage his potential career in a whole other sport. Bo Jackson is one of the greatest two-sport athletes of all time, but at one point, it looked like his career was just going to be on the baseball diamond. In 1985, he was coming off a Heisman campaign at Auburn that saw him rush for just under 1,800 yards and 17 touchdowns, a season that made him pretty much a lock to be the first overall pick in the 86 draft, especially to a team that needed a franchise cornerstone that could turn their otherwise lowly franchise history around. Tampa Bay was in prime position to take Bo first off the board, as they had the first selection in the 1986 draft. The Bucs would have to wait for Bo to become an official member of the team though, as he was still playing baseball for Auburn at the time the NFL draft was to take place. But to Bo's surprise, the NCAA would rule him ineligible for the remainder of his senior season, and he wouldn't be able to finish his collegiate baseball career. After an investigation by the NCAA, he was stripped of his remaining eligibility because of a visit he took to the Bucs training facility on a team private jet. The use of professional team resources was the reason he was ruled ineligible, and while the Bucs organization claimed that they had approval from the NCAA, it turned out that was not the case. Jackson was justifiably angry at this. There were pro scouts that watched him play that said he could be one of the best players in the MLB very early on in his career, and possibly one of the best players ever. His 1985 junior season on the diamond saw him hit 17 home runs and bring in 43 RBIs, which is pretty insane for a two-sport collegiate athlete and very tempting to a player that is considering just a career in baseball. But the Bucks really wanted Bo Jackson. They take him first in the 1986 draft, but Bo refused to play for them. He felt as if by knowingly using team resources to bring him to the facility on a visit before he was drafted, that maybe he'd get his eligibility stripped and that would lure him away from baseball, but that was the furthest thing from what he was going to do. Jackson told the Bucks to not draft him because he wasn't going to play for them for this reason. They took him anyway and essentially set back their franchise for at least another decade and some change because Jackson held his word and did not report to Tampa. He opted to play in the MLB and he was drafted by the Royals in the 4th round of the MLB draft that same year in 1986. The Bucks forfeited his rights before the 1987 draft, which made him eligible to be drafted again, and the Los Angeles Raiders would use a 7th round pick on him to his surprise on the same day he was playing in a game for the Royals against the Orioles. Imagine you have no intention of playing in a league after you felt that an organization had already done you so wrong and someone still seemingly wasted a pick on you. That's what Bo was thinking until Raiders owner Al Davis convinced him otherwise. There were only a handful of teams that Jackson would have considered returning to football for, and when his agent told him that it was the Raiders, he smiled and simply said, "Hell yeah." Not only that, but Davis was a huge fan of the fact that Bo could be a two-sport athlete, and despite the fact that he'd only show up to the Raiders after baseball season was over, they negotiated a contract where he could do just that. Play the entire MLB season and report to LA mid-season. Bo Jackson, to my knowledge, is the only player to be drafted twice in both the NFL and the MLB, as alongside his selections in the 1986 and 87 NFL drafts, he was selected in the 1st round of the 1982 MLB draft by the Yankees out of high school, and then 4 years later after his senior season at Auburn in the 4th round by the Royals. While his career wasn't long in either sport, he is still considered one of the greatest two-sport athletes of all time, and his story that led to him being drafted twice is probably the most interesting in NFL history. The 80s actually saw 2 other players hear their name called in multiple NFL drafts, and it was the first time that 2 college teammates had 4 picks between them, both being drafted 2 times each. And it would make sense that they would both be from what a lot of college football fans consider some of the greatest teams of all time, the 1987 and 1989 national champion Miami Hurricanes. Those 1980s Hurricane teams and the 1980s in general were way before my time, but growing up watching the U30 for 30s, you can get a feel of what that era of college football was like. The 87 Hurricanes, coached by Hall of Famer Jimmy Johnson, would go 12-0 on the way to their 2nd national championship of the 1980s. On a team that had a ton of players hear their name called in the following drafts, including players like Michael Irvin, it was starting running back and later fullback Melvin Bratton, who would find himself being selected in the next 2 NFL drafts. He was a dual threat back who was dangerous in the open field, and during his senior season in 1987, he went for 837 yards from scrimmage with 11 touchdowns on the way to the national championship. But he suffered a pretty serious knee injury which tanked his draft stock and had him fall to the 6th round of the 88 draft to his hometown Miami Dolphins. As he was both a Miami native and Hurricane alum, it was probably a great feeling to get drafted by the Dolphins and be able to train and recover from the injury he suffered in the national championship game at home. He was going to miss the entire 1988 season with his injury, but at least he'd be able to get paid while he was with the team, which you'd think would be the case. Allegedly, Bratton wanted a little more money than the Dolphins were willing to give, especially coming off such a severe injury. And despite the entire process, the 2 sides actually never came to an agreement on a contract, which made him 100% eligible to enter his name in the 1989 NFL draft. He was drafted 1 round later than he was the year before, but the Broncos took a chance on him with the 180th overall pick. Bratton was going to a contender, and by the season's end, he was playing in the Super Bowl. While his numbers as a fullback, like most who play the position, were not going to jump off the page, his game-winning touchdown in the 1989 divisional game against the Steelers is a play that he's been on record to be very fond of. His NFL career only spanned 2 seasons, but he is one of the very few NFL players to be drafted twice, and will later find success as both a scout in the league and as a sports agent. His University of Miami teammate Craig Erickson would also cement himself as a national champion at the U and would later be drafted twice. He was a backup on the 87 team, but was the starting quarterback on the 1989 team that went 11-1 to beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl for the Natty. If this were current day, the starting junior quarterback on a national championship team who had had an otherwise solid season would probably enter the draft, but as mentioned before, the league still didn't allow juniors to enter the draft as 1989 was Erickson's junior year. He returned to Miami for his senior season in 1990 and put up career highs in every major stat, winning the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm that season and leading the Canes to a Cotton Bowl win. But like his former teammate Melvin Bratton, an injury right before the draft would have his draft stock looking a bit differently than if he were healthy. In front of NFL scouts, he'd injure his knee at the 1991 Hula Bowl, but with scouts having seen him at Miami, he could still have a solid career in the right situation. According to most sources at the time, he was projected as a first or second round pick, but after tearing 3 ligaments in your right knee, your stock is probably going to fall a good bit. The Eagles would take him in the 5th round of the 1991 draft as a potential backup to Randall Cunningham, but his injury recovery was going to be an uphill battle. In the midst of training camp, some of the nerves in his knee just hadn't recovered like the doctors had hoped, and his career was in jeopardy. In this article from 1991 that I found that I'll link in the description, he acknowledged that his career could have been over before it even started. While he recovered, he actually went on to be a graduate assistant at Georgia while he was still in contract negotiation with the Eagles. The 1991 college football season would fly by, as the NFL season would, and the Eagles and Erickson would never come to a contract agreement, which made him eligible for the 1992 NFL Draft. As the most recent player to be selected in multiple NFL drafts, Erickson would be selected in the 4th round by the Bucks, and despite looking like he could never play again just a year earlier, he'd go on to have a 7-year NFL career. He beat Tampa's full-time starters in the 1993 and 94 seasons, and also spent time as a backup on the Colts and Dolphins to finish out his career. Every player who has been drafted twice has each had a unique situation and why that happened, and I'm not surprised that it doesn't happen more often, but the fact that each time it does, it's a different reason, which makes it so interesting. It's been over 30 years since a player has been selected in multiple NFL drafts, and I'm not entirely sure we'll see another player get drafted twice at some point. It could happen in the near future or way down the line. It's just one of those rare NFL moments that doesn't come around very often. But I really hope y'all enjoyed this one. It was fun making it, and my name is Caleb. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe. I appreciate y'all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.